Sword Art Online Progressive 005 Canon of the Golden Rule Start. Written by Reki Kawahara. Illustrations by abec. Designed by BP. Read by Mae Zurita. 6th floor of Aincrad, January 2023. Achoo! I spun around to ascertain the nature of the odd sound behind my back. The fencer, who was my temporary partner, had her hands over her nose. A few seconds later, she arched her back and loosed another achoo! Was that a sneeze, or are you saying you want to have patchouli for your bath tonight? I quipped, earning myself a glare. I don't like patchouli. What about pumpkin spice? Nope. Maybe parsnip? Nope. Hey, that's not even a thing, she snapped, bringing the joke full circle. Asana, the level 18 swordswoman, sighed. It was a sneeze, I think? I'm not sure. Huh? What do you mean? Shouldn't you be able to tell if you sneezed or not? I wondered, seriously this time. I came to a stop in the middle of the path. Just an hour or two ago, the central street of Caerluin, the main town of the 5th floor of Aincrad, had been packed with people, but now it was completely empty. The countdown party, with fireworks to celebrate the arrival of the year 2023, was over, and the players had cleared out, returning to their inn rooms or backed into the wilderness to hunt. Asa and I watched the fireworks from an old castle ruins outside of town and waited for the area to grow quiet before we left. This was because we'd had a dangerous, unexpected encounter in the ruins. Even with my excellent search skill, it would be harder to detect someone trailing us in a crowd. I casually checked behind me as I waited for Asana to reply. To my surprise, she had a very rational response. Sneezes are involuntary bodily functions designed to either raise your body temperature when it's cold or expel a foreign object from the nasal cavity, right? Neither are necessary for a player's avatar to do. Oh, well, I guess that's a good point. So, if the SAO system is artificially reproducing some kind of sneezing function, I'm not certain that can be called a real sneeze. That's my point. I see, I murmured, impressed. Then my own nose started to tickle. It was either the chill of the repetition of the word sneeze that was making me conscious of it. Eventually, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I exploded. Asana grinned smugly at me. What's that? Are you saying you want bruschetta for breakfast tomorrow? What's bruschetta? It's a kind of Italian finger food. That actually sounds kind of good, I murmured, imagining what this bruschetta might look like, and unconsciously tugging the collar at my coat tighter before realizing what I was doing. Hey, is it just me, or is it kind of cold in here? Yeah, it's rather chilly. Asana wore a hooded wool cape, but was over a miniskirt that didn't seem to defend much against the elements. A man who was smooth and considerate would put his own coat on her without saying a word. But as a loser gamer and shut-in, I wasn't equipped with any skills that I couldn't earn in a video game. Fortunately, before I said or did anything to embarrass myself, Asana opened her menu and adjusted her equipment mannequin, light covered with the pale legs exposed by her leather battle skirt, then faded into white tights. There shouldn't be any artificial fibers in this world, given the setting, but somehow the skin-tight material seemed to shine in the light. I couldn't help but stare, before she would have retaliated with a cold look, sharp words, and perhaps some kind of physical attack. But this time, Asana just cleared her throat and looked up at the bottom of the floor above, visible in the dark. Well, it is the beginning of the year, so you would expect it to be cold, and yet the 4th floor was quite warm when we were down there recently. How does Aincrad handle the seasons of the year? It was August in the beta, but even though the sun felt hot at midday, it wasn't like unpleasant hot, and it wasn't like nothing like the suffocating muggy heat of midsummer in real life. I suppose if it were really that hot, nobody would be able to bother with a full plate of armor and the like. Good point. Makes me wonder what those old European knights did during the summer. The Knights Templar of the Kingdom of Jerusalem lost to Saladin's forces because the heat sapped their strength. Ah, I see. As usual, Asuna had plenty of facts to back herself up. I started getting the nasty feeling that she might eventually learn more about Aincrad than even I knew, so I quickly brought us back to the matter at hand. The point is, Aincrad does model the seasons to an extent, but I don't think it actually simulates heat and cold to a level that is uncomfortable. I mean, this isn't nearly as bad as the midwinter weather we'd been feeling in the real world, right? Even dressed like this, the worst it does is make me sneeze. But there are exceptions. I seem to remember reading about floors that are winter or summer all year round, according to the magazine article or something. Asuna glanced up once more and then wondered, "You didn't find this floor of eternal summer during the beta test?" Well, it was summer at the time, but I do remember a beach on the south side of floor 7. It had white sand, coconut trees, and a bunch of employers enjoying the summer vacation swimsuits. The way you say that makes me assume that you didn't take part. She nodded insightfully. Well, a guy celebrating his vacation all alone is kind of sad, right? I admitted. It's fine. I was focused on getting through the game. This desperate excuse made Asuna grin enough to forget the cold. She patted me on the back. South side of 7th floor? I'll remember that if it's really an area of eternal summer. Then? I think I'll keep it under wraps until then. Let's get going until the main town. 6 floors starts in earnest today. The fencer walked off at a brisk pace, and I had to rush to catch up, feeling skeptical. It had been more than a month since our temporary partnership began. I still couldn't tell what she was thinking most of the time. But I guess that's part of her charm, I thought, which was uncharacteristic of me. I shook my head, and my nostrils began itching again. It was harmless enough in the safety of town, but if I sneezed in a dungeon while trying to hide, the consequences could be disastrous. I'd have to study how to suppress the urge. I tried holding my nose, and then my breath, but neither worked. Eventually, my itchiness meter reached its peak. Asuna stopped and turned around to look at me with a 60% annoyed glare and 40% enigmatic smile. "Are you that excited about the summer vacation?" she asked. No, Then we'd better get through the 6th floor as quickly as we can. I'm telling you, it's not like that. But no matter how much I protested, the smirk never left the fencer's face. In the end, I wasn't even sure if I really wanted the 7th floor to be everlasting summer paradise or not. 1. Even on the other side of the teleport gate, the air was still chilly. Unlike Herluin, the 5th floor's main town that existed in the ruins of an ancient city, Stachien was pristinely built town on the 6th floor. The main material construction was a shiny gray rock like polished granite, and every single structure was made of blocks exactly the same size in a grid pattern, about 8 inches to a side, meaning that everything was straight lines and angles. The effect was so striking that when I first visited this place in the beta, my reaction was, well, exactly the same as Asuna now. Oh, it's so blocky. Well, we are trapped in a video game, I replied, the standard joke in Stachien. It earned me a piercing, cold glare that lowered my body temperature even further. I tugged the collar of my coat up, but it did nothing to keep the chill away. It was still much better than actual winter, but one more annoying part of Virtual World was that once you noticed it was warm or cold, the only way to stop feeling it required some kind of in-game logic. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, January 1st, 2023. The frontline population's New Year's enthusiasm had burned itself out with fireworks show, and hardly a soul could be found in the teleport gate square in Stachien. A dry north wind blew through the empty space, which was about 50 yards to a side. I figured it would be cold for Asuna and her miniskirt, but between the fleece-lined cape and tights, she seemed to be protected enough. Or perhaps the chill I'm feeling now is more than just the nerve gear's artificial sensations. In the old castle ruins of East Caerluin, where Asuna and I were going to watch a fireworks show, I'd left to go get food and run straight into an attack by a mysterious figure in a black poncho. The castle was within the protective limits of the town, of course, so his plan had to be cleverly tricking me into thinking I was still inside the anti-criminal code zone, while he lured me into the castle's basement, which was actually outside the safe area. The man in the black poncho had snuck up right behind me. Despite my proficiency in search skill, pointed a knife to my back and whispered, "It's showtime." The coldness of that voice would not leave my ears, the way it richly lilted through a song, and yet alien in how it betrayed no discernible emotion. It was nearly too late to detect his bluff. I rattled off a series of sword skills within the safe zone, hoping to push him into a simulated stunned state, but he used an unfamiliar smokescreen item to escape. I rushed back to the room where I'd left Asuna, and was so relieved to see my temporary partner safe that I hugged her, earning me a vicious hook in the right flank. But that hadn't solved the underlying problem. My guess was that the man in the black poncho was the boss of Morche, the Axeman, who tried to kill me in a duel, the leader of the PK group Agitators, who had tempted the Legend Braves into their equipment upgrading scam, and who tried to get the Dragon Knights Brigade, DKB, and the Einkrad Liberation Squad, ALS, to go to war against each other. Thanks to me and Asuna intervening, neither of those incidents developed into disaster. That was why the man in the black poncho came to eliminate me directly, I assumed. But they weren't going to give up from a single failed attempt. I'd have to watch out for danger at all times from now on. And there was one even larger problem. There was a high possibility that they'd go after Asuna too. That, above all else, I had to prevent, and yet I still hadn't told her about the attack I'd just suffered. I wasn't going to keep it a secret, of course. By tonight's instay at the latest, I'd tell her all about the man in detail and give her another primer of the basic tenets of PvP combat. But all I could do to grapple at the moment was that what had happened right after we ascended to the 5th floor. It was Asuna who'd asked for a lesson in player versus player battle, whether you called it PvP or dueling or whatever. After the fight against Morche on the 4th floor, I immediately recognized the importance of this lesson. So, in an emptied corner of the ruins, we engaged in a proper duel. But once we actually faced each other with swords, she couldn't move. Instead, tearfully lowered her blade and said that she didn't want to do it. It wasn't that she had no talent for PvP. When one PKers had nearly taken her chivalric rapier in the ruins of the dungeons of the 5th floor, the way she utilized the looting monster to get it back was brilliant work. Once that imagination of hers had both knowledge and experience to bolster it, she'd been able to put her already considerable talent to use in the arena of man-to-man combat. But under the current rules of SAO, where dying in-game meant dying in real life, a player duel was therefore a fight to the death. If both sides were evenly matched, the winner would be whoever had less hesitation about taking the other's life. In other words, without that level of cruelty, any potential victory in a close fight was likely to result in a loss. If I was going to teach Asuna on how to fight another player, it was more important that she learned the cold irrationality than any fiddly mechanical techniques I might teach her. I'd never killed another player myself, of course, but if it was necessary to protect myself or my partner, I believed I could do it. Or, phrased another way, I wasn't good enough person at heart to hesitate in the heat of the moment. But Asuna was different. She was much more kind-hearted than me. With an upright and honest soul, I didn't want to tell her that she should be cold and cruel and ready to kill. "Hey, Kirito." I looked up and saw my partner right in front of me and concerned. "Why did you clam up all of a sudden? You aren't hungry already, are you?" No, that's not it." "Then can I ask you my first question of the 6th floor?" Go right ahead," I prompted. We'd been in the middle of the 10th floor when the beta test ended, so including this floor, there were only 4.5 left where I could actually answer Asuna's question. After all that happened, we're already on the 6th floor, I marveled. Then the fencer simply asked, "What's this?" Asuna pointed down at her feet. I followed her slender index finger to one of the gray tiles that paved the teleport square, like the blocks that made up the building. It was just ordinary stone, about 8 inches to a side, but one in every 4 or so tiles had an Arabic numeral on one of the 9 on it. Ah, yes, these. I took 2 steps back and pointed down, just like she did. See how the line between them is thicker here? You're right. This thicker line is where the tiles are split into 9 by 9 grids of 81 tiles total. Does this look familiar to you? 9 by 9, Asuna mumbled. She blinked 3 times, and then looked up and grinned. Oh, I get it. This is Sudoku puzzle. I was pretty good at them. Interesting. So the tiles of the square make a puzzle. She trailed off as she got another look around the teleport square. If you ignore the actual teleport gate in the middle of the entire square, 50 yards to a side was covered in these tiles, and those Sudoku puzzles with their number hints ran from end to end. How many of these puzzles are there? If it hasn't changed from the beta, there are 27 rows and columns of 81 tile sets. Since the exact middle one is taken up by the gate, that means it's 27 squared minus 1, which is equal to 728. 700? Asuna gasped quietly. She looked away from the number at her feet. For a moment, I was interested in solving them all. I am no longer interested. A wise decision, I said, with a sage tone channeling that of any given village elder NPC. During the beta test, those youngsters who fell prey to the lures of the Sudoku and gave up on helping us advance the game were called Sudokers, out of respect. That's an even sadder nickname than the hoarders who got addicted to finding coins in the ruins. But given how many of these puzzles there are, doesn't that mean there's some mammoth reward if you solve them all? You'd think so, I said, normally this time. I was under the assumption during the beta that the Sudokers certainly believed it, but the nasty part about this is all the hint number gets switched up at midnight every night. What? So you're saying if you wanted to solve the whole batch, you'd have to do 728 Sudoku puzzles in the span of 24 hours? Asuna exclaimed. She started counting with her fingers. Let's see. At a glance, these look like maximum difficulty, so even an expert would take a good 20 minutes to solve one. Multiplying that by 728 would be 14,560 minutes. Divided by 60 makes 242 hours and 40 minutes. I had to admit that the speed of this calculation backed up her claim to be pretty good at math puzzles. That's over 10 days, she exclaimed, her shock turning into annoyance. That's impossible. I'm not going to do them. Nobody said you had to. At any rate, the Sudokers split up as group and tried to tackle them. And even then, they weren't as fast enough to beat it by midnight. So on the last day of the beta, they resorted to the forbidden measures. Forbidden? Since you could log in and out as much as you wanted in the beta, they would memorize the placement of the hints and then log out and use an external program to solve the problem. Oh, I see, Asuna said, smirking. I concluded the hero's tale. They beat the whole lot just an hour before the end of the test. Now, do you see how just one tile out of the 81 is darker in color? You're right. The number of those tiles are some kind of key. So at the end of all the work, the Sudokers got 728 key numbers. And that was it. Nobody knew what to do with them. They say that for the last hour until the end of the test, the tragic Sudokers were reduced to running around the square in their underpants, screaming the numbers and going mad. Asuna's annoyance turned to pity. She gazed out at the wide space of flat stone and numbers, lonely in the moonlight. Without another word on the matter, she closed her eyes for a moment and then waved her right hand to bring up the menu. Oh my, it's past 3. We should go into the inn already. I assume the DKB and the ALS will be sleeping in too, but I'd still like to get up and back to business by 10 o'clock. Good idea, I agreed, reminded of my earlier anxiety, but Asana's smile was earnest and innocent. Here's question 2 then. What's your recommended place to stay in Stachin? For about 3 minutes, we walked east down the road paved in the same tiles as the square, until I led Asana to a nondescript mid-sized inn. Though, given the way that everything in the town was built out of the same little blocks, it was hard for any of them to acquire distinguishing features. I pushed open the wooden door, at least it was different, and checked in the counter, reserving 2 adjacent rooms on the second floor. The empty hallway up there turned out to be 10 blocks wide, just over 6 feet, with no place to hide. I kept my hackles up from the moment we'd arrived at this level of Einkrad till we got to this inn, but no one had given following or watching us, at least so I thought, but I couldn't be absolutely certain, because now I suspected the man in the black poncho had a hiding skill at least as good as my search. I could no longer trust my eyes and ears. I walked to the end of the hallway, keenly aware of the stress of being in potential danger. Asana was in room 201 in the corner, while I was in 202, just before it. The fencer yawned gracefully in front of her door and glanced at me. Shall we meet in the restaurant downstairs at 8? Or, 9 o'clock. That's fine with me. Then good night, Kirito. She waved and grabbed the door handle, but the handle rattled in place and resisted her pressure. Whoops, is this the other one, or my room? She wondered, shuffling over with sleepy eyes. I grabbed her shoulders. No, you have the right one. Why isn't it opening then? Her question was a reasonable one. In the rooms in Einkrad didn't have keys as general rule. Doors automatically unlocked for the owner or the registered friendly and party members. System choice made for player convenience. And we were in a party together, so even if she'd gotten into my room, the door should have opened. I walked over to Asana, who was half asleep, half skeptical, and pointed at the 202 attached to her door. On a closer look, the square plate was split into a 4x4 grid, with the other squares having fainter numbers on their own in a single blank space in the bottom right corner. Doesn't this look familiar too? I prompted. Asana blinked about 5 times and finally said, "Oh, is this a 15 puzzle? Bingo. Only in this case, the numbers go from 0 to 14. Are you saying that if I don't solve this puzzle, the door won't open?" Correct. Now her expression was 20% sleepiness, 20% suspicion, 60% disgust. I hastily added, but don't worry, there's a trick to this. I reached up to the plate and started sliding the wooden numbers around, which were randomly placed aside from the room 201 numbers. See, it's easy to get to 0 through 7 in the top rows, right? After that, you just line up 8 and 12 in the lower left and then put 9 and 13 next to them, and the rest is natural. The moment I slid 14 into the right spot, there was an audible click as the door unlocked. Then I pushed the handle and the door opened inward this time. "Thank you," Asana said, but her expression did not suggest gratitude. I'd brought her to this inn for a reason. All of the puzzle doors in Stachin, the ones here were on the simple side, but there was something more important to explain to her now, more important than the facts of this town, or this entire floor. Asana was quite exhausted, and I was reaching the peak of my fatigue too. But the last thing I wanted to do now was to put off this decision until tomorrow, only to regret it. "Well, good night." Asana started to vanish through the doorway. I raised my voice just 5% higher than normal. "Asana?" "What?" she asked, eyes bleary. I felt guilty, but there was no going back now. I have something important to tell you. Do you mind if I just come into your room for a bit?" Go ahead." Her permission came shockingly easy. She totted down through the doorway. I hurried after her before the door automatically locked itself. As the corner room, 202 had a large window on the east and south sides, but there was no skyline to look at now. The room was maybe 175 square feet and had standard furniture, a bed that was spacious enough for but not two, a sofa set, and writing desk. The floor was dark brown, but checkered in a familiar 8-inch pattern. Asana floated weightlessly to the bed and plopped down onto its soft surface. She waited for me to speak, just barely preventing herself from flopping over into a sleeping position. So what's this important thing that you have to tell? Important thing? She repeated, blinking thrice. Suddenly, her eyes were wide open. She stared around the room and then back at me. For some reason, her left hand reached for a large pillow, and she clutched it in front of her as she stammered. Wait, important, I'm not ready for, It wasn't clear what Asana was imagining, but fortunately for me, whatever it was had woken her up a bit. I took a step closer. Listen, Asana. No, wait, I just wait. No, I can't wait. What? She was clutching the pillow so hard it was fit to burst. I took another step closer. Asana, in the morning, I want you to practice human combat with me. I know you hate PvP, but we're coming to the point where there's no getting around it. Before we start heading out to tackle this floor, we should at least spend half the day practicing. Stop. Her hand darted out at the speed of lightning, cutting me off. She took several deep breaths, and eventually she got to her feet, still holding the pillow. I knew that I couldn't keep running away from it, so I agree with your point about training. I'm ready for it. Oh, cool. But let me just say one thing first. The fencer grinned at me kindly, switched the pillow over to her right hand, and then cocked it back. That was extremely misleading! She screamed, hurling it at me overhand with a bit of rotation, like a major league pitcher. The pillow hurtled over audibly toward me, as hard enough to flash up the purple barrier effect when it landed, no matter how soft it was. A cold drink of water helped calm Asana down, after which I briefly explained what happened in the castle of ruins of Caerluin. While she was furious at the necro poncho and somewhat concerned for me as well, she largely accepted the situation calmly and rationally and agreed to resume dueling practice. By the end of this, it was already 3:40, so we delayed the next day's meeting until 9:30, and I left room 201. Suddenly, the Sandman's bags weighed heavily on my eyelids, now that I was no longer holding him at bay with sheer willpower. But there was another job I had to do before I opened the door to my own room. Unlike 201, the 15 puzzle to room 202 had a pair of 2s, and the highest number was 13. While I did make a few mistakes of it, I managed to finish the puzzle within under 30 seconds. I opened the door into my own room, removed my gear as I shuffled forward, and plunged into bed face first. I had time for just a few thoughts in the 3 seconds before I fell asleep. You know, I forgot to actually tell Asana that the entire theme of the floor is puzzles. And what did she mean by misleading?